If there's one thing in the world that people lack, it's the understanding of the concept sovereignty. If more people understood this, oh, so important concept, my goodness, what a different, magnificently different world we would be living in. So, what is sovereignty? Are you sovereign? Are your friends and family sovereign? Well, watch and find out. Sovereignty is supreme authority of your character, your mind, yourself. Sovereignty is an objective self-identification of status in relationship to reality by independently evaluating the nature of yourself and the facts of existence. It is to utilize the power of one's mind and its method of reason to recognize the fact that you have the ultimate last say on all your beliefs, ideas, and actions. It is to accept the fact that as a thinking, rational, and intelligent being, there are no powers above you that have a greater claim to your judgment and subsequent actions. To be fully sovereign is to be fully responsible for one's being. A sovereign is one who independently fact checks all his ideas and does not allow himself to proclaim possibility, probability, or certainty on any issue on an unanalyzed basis. A sovereign does not believe anything, for to believe is to accept something as true without proof. He knows what he knows and what he does not. He does not accept ideas as true without veracious reason to. A sovereign treats his mind like his home. He doesn't allow free entry to strangers, liars, or criminals. He has the best mental security possible. Ideas which are false are rejected at the door. Only those who have proven to be trustworthy, accurate, and beneficial are allowed entry. The arbitrary and the fallacious are dismissed without a second thought. A sovereign does not assume what can be known, and he does not make assumptions when he lacks evidence to make a judgment. To be sovereign is to be honest. If one is honest with themselves, they cannot value another's claim of right to rule them more than their own independent judgment. To place any kind of ruler above them is an act of dishonesty and self-betrayal. One who is sovereign knows they have the capacity to rule themselves and actively does so. If one was to forfeit this power, they would feel like a traitor to their own mind, to their spirit. It would be as if they had fired their home security in favor of a doorman who allowed free passage to the liar and the criminal. For how could one rationally declare that another has the right to rule their mind, to make judgments in their stead? For only one who is not sovereign accepts the conclusions of others without understanding the reasons to do so. A sovereign does not accept the conclusions of others without understanding the reasons, why, or if those conclusions are legitimate. For this is the mind of the servant, to accept others' judgments, conclusions, and ideas as true without knowing why they are true, or even if they are at all. A sovereign's mind can be paralleled to a courthouse. Verdicts are not given idly, but scrupulously, with every attention to detail which can be mustered. For what is the consequence of an inaccurate judgment? Either an innocent man is condemned as guilty, or a guilty man is set free. Both are terrible consequences which must be avoided at all costs. The admittance of false ideas into one's mind ensures catastrophe in equal measure to the rejection of true ideas. A sovereign bears the full responsibility of all his ideas as judge, jury, and executioner. Whenever he identifies an idea as false, he executes it without hesitation or mercy. Whenever he identifies an idea as true, he welcomes it with open arms. He does not welcome or accept that which he has not judged as worthy of welcome. Sovereign does not treat his mind like a dumpster, throwing in any old waste without discretion or order. Trash, false ideas, are discarded, and valuable resources and materials, true ideas, are integrated. His home, his mind, is a paradise, because it is by his command he makes it so. A sovereign mind is like an emperor. The emperor of an empire is not told what to do by anyone. He is the boss. He is in control. He is the dominant force that rules. Advisors can advise him on what to do, but he will only act upon their advice if it makes sense. If an idea does not make sense to the emperor, if he does not see its validity or reason, then he will dismiss it. One does not need to be an emperor to have the mind of an emperor. All it takes is to accept the fact that you are responsible for all your ideas and actions. If you independently verify all your thoughts and actions via a process of reason and act honestly, then you are sovereign. One cannot come to an honest and rational conclusion that they owe subservience to anyone, whether that be man, alien, or God. This is because it would be a contradiction of one's identity and nature as a rational, intelligent being who is capable of living by his own independent conclusions. To be sovereign is to live for yourself, for your own reasons, your own desires, pleasures, ambitions. Not to appease your family, not to continue tradition, and not to make your ancestors proud. Your life does not belong to God, society, your partner, a government, or anything else. Your life is yours. The difference between a sovereign and a servant is that one respects this fact and the other desecrates it. One cannot be a second-hander who lives according to others' desires, ideas, and expectations, while simultaneously being sovereign. A second-hander acts and does what he does because he values the opinions of others more than his own. A sovereign does what he does because he wants to, according to his rational self-interest. A sovereign chooses his values objectively, according to the facts of reality and the nature of his personal interests. A sovereign is a self-made, self-governing man. There can be such a thing as an enslaved sovereign, but there can never be a servile sovereign. A slave is controlled by force. A servant is controlled via choice. A slave is one who is physically forced into servitude. Servant is one who willingly accepts ideas which enslave him, which bind his will to that of another, and who volitionally serves masters without the need of force. Servitude is effectively perfected slavery. The servant who doesn't understand he is enslaved to ideas which are not his own, who doesn't realize he is acting out a life which was given to him and isn't his own, will never rebel. To be a servant, the opposite of a sovereign, is to be a disintegrated multi-personality. The servant believes in contradictory, opposing ideas, like a schizophrenic madman. For example, less taxes, but more government welfare, like capitalism and monopolies, like pride and humility. To be sovereign is to be a complete, unified personality that acts predictably and reliably according to the values which one chooses independently by a self-judged code to action. Sovereignty is individualism. Servitude is collectivism. In counter to the argument that only royalty with an army is sovereign. All the kings and queens of the past were sovereign. That didn't stop opposing sovereigns from attacking them, killing them and taking their land. Sovereign means of one's own authority. It doesn't mean omnipotence. You can be locked in prison and still be sovereign. You can be a king or just an individual man and be sovereign. Sovereignty is a relationship with self and others. A sovereign can still be forced and overpowered to do things against their will, but that's the key point here, against their will. Someone who isn't sovereign follows orders and does the will of another, to their detriment, without the use of force. That's a servant. A king is a position or title. Sovereign is a status. You may have a king, emperor, or president who is not sovereign, but merely a puppet to a power beyond them. It doesn't matter if you have an army or not. A king can still be assassinated, wiped out by a bigger army, or killed by his own rebellious people. To be sovereign is to not accept any authority or ruler above you. Kings, queens, and emperors typically did not accept anyone to be above them. Just like I do not accept any authority above me. I don't have to be a king to be sovereign, and nor do you. If you reject any kind of authority superior to you, then you too can be sovereign. A sovereign does not obey commands without hesitation. Only if the command is backed by force and he is unable to counter the force would he comply. To be sovereign is to handpick all your ideas. A sovereign is a self-governing, intellectually independent, rational, and self-respecting man or woman. A sovereign takes nothing on faith. His ideas and concepts are verified by a process of reason, and his reason is measured by objectivity. Objectivity is that which is provable as per evidence. Evidence is evaluated perceptually and conceptually via induction. Only one who is self-interested acts to achieve a state of objective, independently verified truth. When one learns what they are and thus acknowledges their capacity, one then continues to act as a sovereign. One who is sovereign self-governs in the tangible and non-tangible realms of reality. They make their own choices, which are vetted by a process of reason for the purpose of achieving their best interests. One who is sovereign makes perceptual and conceptual judgments on the basis of objective reason. Those who aren't sovereign believe a claim and act as if it were true without verifying that claim. The mentality of a volitional slave is, I don't know how to control myself. Please help me. Someone control me. It's that of a wild horse which wants to be broken in, to be relieved of the burden of deciding where it goes and when. Whether one chooses to be sovereign or not comes down to their desire to control their life as much as possible, or to delegate control to as many external forces as possible. When one wants to control every facet of their destiny, when one wants to write their own fate, when one wants total realistic power over themselves to the highest degree, they must choose to be sovereign, for there is no other way to control one's life than to be sovereign. Total control over one's life means to be in total control of everything one can reasonably and physically control in their life. When one is only interested in having partial control over their life, not 100%, one will happily exchange their sovereignty for a perceived state of bliss. This state of ignorance is bliss is a false state. Full of numbness and devoid of purpose or power, it is unnatural and antipodal to man's true state. The cost of being passive, irresponsible, and unaccountable, which is the price one must pay to experience this drugged out of existence state of being, is not a cost to a selfless, imbecilic average Joe. It's a highly prized treasure, worth every scrap of dignity they have left to feel like a child again, powerless and clueless to the affairs of reality, yet bathed in the mystery and awe of an unknown world. The sovereignty-rejecting masses say they love the world, yet focus all their remaining power to fanatically ignoring it with the intensity of a religious zealot. They want to get a career in the world, travel the world, get married in the world, have children in the world, buy a house in the world, yet they flat out refuse to know anything objectively about the world. They say they love the world and are happy, yet take every chance they get to unconsciously destroy themselves and the world. They would prefer to be a passenger in their own body, watching as it enacts the programs of the Matrix, encased in a numb wrapping of obliviousness, than to exert control and power over their own mind and seize their sovereignty as every man is duty-bound to do. The thought of being sovereign and responsible terrifies them more than the thought of being powerless and at the mercy of whoever holds their remote control. They feel more anxiety about thinking than about not having a single self-generated thought of their own. What repulses the typical NPC, muggle or unthinking servant, is not the fact they are being manipulated and used as the playthings of external forces. It's that if they were to accept such a reality as true, that have to do something about it. The masses would prefer to live forever without effort, as sheep, caged on a farm, yet fed, housed and watered, than to live as a free lion for a day in the wild. The average mind has been conditioned to be intellectually lazy and apathetic, and as a result, has accepted the status of servant. If you have the power to choose, you are responsible for the choices you make. Blaming others for your decision is only valid if you really had no choice, such as when coerced by violence or literal incapacity. If you make a choice freely, you own that decision. If you're misled by false information, that can be a valid excuse. But if you had the means to verify the facts and chose not to become informed, you are responsible for your ignorance. Sovereignty means taking responsibility for your actions and not shifting blame to others. A sovereign individual controls their life and doesn't surrender that control. One is not sovereign if they trade their reason for ignorance. Sovereignty is always a volitional and willing choice. It is not automatic. One cannot merely feel or want to be sovereign. They must truly understand the concept, choose it, and then act it out every single day. One cannot have a great body just by wanting it or even by knowing how to achieve it. They must first desire it, know how to do it, choose to do it, and then actually do it continuously to achieve their desired results. To continue having a great body, they need to consistently act out the necessary actions which are required to build and maintain a great body. The same is true for sovereignty. There are levels of freedom which come in two categories: internal and external freedom, and the same can be said for slavery. One can be free in mind, but imprisoned in body. One can be imprisoned in mind, but free, relatively, in body. One may choose to use their free will to enslave themselves and to reject their potential to be sovereign. How one exercises their power to control their life depends on their level of self-esteem, desires, self-respect, and physical capacity. Free will is the power and ability to make choices, positive or negative, to enhance, maintain, or restrict one's freedom. Freedom can be defined as one's available set of options, derived from the possibilities available in reality. One may choose to positively enhance their freedom and choose a sovereign path, yet another may use their free will to limit themselves to a life of determined servitude. One could be free to walk the streets, drive across a country, or fly across the world and not be sovereign, locked inside a mental prison of another's design but by their own choices. Yet someone locked in prison may have had their external freedom taken, but internally they're sovereign because they choose to be to the extent that's physically possible. To be free means to exercise the freedom which one has available in specific circumstances in an egoic manner. To be sovereign is to act freely and to independently vet all your ideas. Freedom is an availability of options to choose from, and free will is the power to choose from that availability of options. You have the freedom to raise your arm in the next moment, to book a flight to another country, to go out to lunch. You don't have the freedom to teleport or jump 50 miles high. I know, so sad. Because those things aren't possible. Freedom is limited to actions which are possible to take in reality. Freedom is the set of options available in any given circumstance. Free will is the power to focus attention and to make a choice out of those options. To be free, one must be the selfish chooser and beneficiary of their choices. They must be in direct control of their mental and physical actions. One cannot be free when they aren't responsible for their choices and are not the primary beneficiary of their actions. How could they if everything they did was not for their own selfish interests? If one is depressed after a breakup and is constantly ruminating, sending them into a descending spiral of depression, then they're not free. They're being controlled by their emotions, thoughts, and memories, which are all a result of their previous exercise of free will. Only when they overcome these negative mental influences, which they are doing to themselves, although unconsciously, or perhaps even consciously, only then will they be free. To be free is to be able to consciously focus your attention on what you desire, If you can't shift your focus to what you want to be aware of, then you're not free. If you're doing things which you consciously disagree with, such as smoking, drinking alcohol, eating junk food, or thinking about your ex, then you're a prisoner to your own programming. If one's desires are self-destructive, they aren't truly free, as these desires are not rational. Self-destructive behavior arises when one is under internal or external attack, consciously or unconsciously, and lacks the ability to respond effectively, leading to a suppression of true consciousness. When one acts on negative desires, such as smoking, self-harm, or voting, they aren't expressing true desires, but are instead driven by programmed mechanisms or subliminal coding. These destructive routines are often the result of a consciousness suppression attack orchestrated by malevolent forces. These agents design and spread suppression programs through various channels, such as media, advertising, social platforms, schools, to subtly implant harmful ideas and behaviors. Accepting these programs is like downloading a virus onto a computer. But despite warnings, individuals ignore their own inbuilt protective mechanisms, reason, and install these negative influences into their minds. Once their mind becomes corrupted by these destructive programs, they are no longer free. Their behavior, which aligns with the virus's intentions, shows they're compromised. True freedom can only be regained by detoxing these mental viruses, uninstalling the harmful programs, and returning to a natural, uncorrupted state of being. If one does not know what is actually in their interests, they fail to use their free will to discover the objective truth of what's good for them and what's not. If one's choices in life are sacrificial, then they're not free, but held hostage to the demands of those who beg for their sacrifice. Remembering, a sacrifice is the exchange of a higher value for a lower value. If I have a $50 note and I exchange it for a $5 note, that's a sacrifice. If you gain or maintain a value from an exchange, then it's not a sacrifice. Those who sacrifice are deceived by a Trojan horse mind virus that benefits others to the detriment of themselves. They believe their actions serve their interests but lack the awareness to see their exploitation. Though they think they're making choices, an outside observer can see they're not the true beneficiaries. Without control over the decisions, their life isn't truly their own. Accurate perception and conceptualization are essential for true freedom. If one's perception and conceptualization of the external world are incorrect, their internal world will also be flawed. Likewise, an inaccurate internal world leads to misperceptions, misinterpretations, and faulty conceptualizations of the external world. To be free, one must align their perception, concepts, and interpretation of both the internal and external worlds. Without this objective awareness, people remain clueless to the true nature of reality and fall victim to predators who take advantage of helpless lambs. When one's actions are for their greatest selfish benefit, in alignment with their rational values, then they are exercising their free will in a way which is free. To be in alignment with objective morality is to choose to exercise free will with those actions which one has the right to do. One's only restriction should be a code which prohibits them from committing evil. To be sovereign means possessing a level of consciousness that allows you to recognize yourself as an intelligent being with free will, capable of choosing your own autonomous path in life. Without self-respect, one cannot be sovereign, for they would not believe they are worthy to rule themselves. Humility is a deflated sense of self that leads one to behave and think as an inferior being out of touch with accurate reality who cannot rule themselves. Arrogance is an inflated sense of self that leads one to behave and think as a superior being out of touch with accurate reality and who believes they have the right to rule others. Both humility and arrogance are polar opposites of self-respect. Humility is the underestimation of oneself and is a lack of self-respect, whereas arrogance is an overestimation and false belief that one is worth more than they are in actuality. The arrogant end up ruling the humble, both dependent on each other for their self-esteem and value. both equally as parasitic and enslaved to their insecurities. Sovereignty requires an accurate to reality perception of one's real worth. To do this, one cannot be humble or arrogant. They must stop pretending they must be real. When one realizes and comes to the logical conclusion that they are alive, conscious, and have free will, it's then their duty, their obligation to exercise their free will in a rationally selfish way. To act objectively egoically is an obligation, because if you don't, you will inevitably cause harm to others with your dangerous beliefs that are detached from reality and morality. From circumcision to religious crusades, one who becomes aware of their own consciousness through self-evident observation concludes that they can either act in a way which is self-serving and beneficial or which is sacrificial and detrimental. There is never a situation where one can give away their sovereign power to benefit themselves. One might pretend to do so in the interests of self-preservation, should the circumstances arise which can be beneficial, but this only has value in an emergency for a limited period of time. Giving power away happens far too often, such as when people give their power away to a partner, unknown government representative, Jesus, God, aliens, or the universe. To choose to be sovereign means that you choose to be the one and only rightful master of yourself, the supreme highest chooser of your choices, a lord of one. Those who lack self-respect, who don't believe they are worthy or deserving enough to rule themselves and be the decider of their choices, will not choose to be sovereign. They will instead behave in a self-sacrificially way as a volitional slave, servant. A servant is not the ultimate decider of their choices, is not their own master, and places others' ideas, needs, and values above their own. A servant is a second-hander, a repeating parrot. This is very common, if not the rule, for those who have faith in governments, religions, and any other powers above them. One who is sovereign can recognize that someone else may be more intelligent or skilled than they are. Although, this does not mean they would give permission for this smarter person to rule them. And remember, there is a huge difference between rulership and leadership. Learn that. Not everyone is sovereign, yet everyone has the option to become sovereign. Unfortunately, most choose to be servants as they lack the consciousness to know the difference between being owned and living freely, and don't respect their minds as they should. Sovereignty does not mean one owns themselves. For oneself is the being which has the power to own things. You are that which has the power of ownership. You aren't property. Unfortunately, most people exist as property of the ruling class they have volitionally decided to serve. Willful slavery, which is servitude, is about delegating thought, about giving away the responsibility of consciousness and consideration of reality to another. Servitude is about irking the duty of participating in one's journey of life and thrusting that responsibility to anyone else who wants to claim it, such as religions, governments. Sovereignty is about retaining these fundamental duties inherent to man. An owned animal is one which has been domesticated. Domestication is an act of trained slavery to fulfill the needs and desires of the master. A dog has been domesticated to give a human master company and affection. A chicken, cow, and pig have been domesticated to be farmed as food. The masses have been domesticated to be volitional slaves who do the unquestioning bidding of their political, religious, and ideological masters. The similarity between these examples is that all of them are unaware. They've been domesticated and are treated as property. A person who believes in a god or gods are superior to themselves cannot be sovereign. Sovereignty means recognizing yourself as the highest authority in your life, whereas belief in a god implies surrendering that authority to an unprovable being. Whether a god exists or not is totally irrelevant. Any god that did exist which demanded you to be owned by it and to obey its commands without independent rational judgment is an evil god which does not deserve anything from you except your ignorance of it, your willful ignoring of it. If a truly benevolent God did exist, it would treat you as you would your child who had grown up, as their own independent being with no right to control them. God's existence does not change the fact one objectively ought to function in a sovereign manner. God doesn't exist. Watch my other video, I'll explain it there. To accept that you owe allegiance to a power above you, in violation of your own judgment and interests, is to forsake your sovereignty and abdicate reason. It is to give up and surrender, to be totally defeated, and ultimately be a failure. If there was a benevolent God that created you and everything, would it not be testing to see if its creations were sovereign or not? Any being which decided to be servile would be classified as a failure, as what would be the point of a servant's existence? There is no point to a servant's existence because their life is not their own. It has no value. If mankind requires drones, he will build them from metal. For man to descend into servitude is an affront against reality itself, an abomination of the highest order. When one chooses to be servile, they choose to give up on themselves. It's a statement that one is incapable of living as a rational, independent being and requires another's intellect to commandeer them due to incompetency and a literal mental vacancy. One who has chosen servitude is committed to becoming an empty vessel, a receptacle ready to be filled with whatever others wish to force inside. If one does not exercise their free will to craft their character and instead allows another to make all their most important choices, how could they be considered a being at all? A lamp or a tea cloth are merely inanimate objects. They don't have life, consciousness, or free will. They had no choice in being created and have no power to alter their current design or decide their destiny. They are powerless to control anything about themselves and are not even aware they exist at all, just like this water bottle. You are a conscious being and you use these inanimate objects as you decide when you'll turn the lamp on or where you'll place it in your house. Objects without consciousness and without the power to alter their states of being are not beings, but objects. A being is one who has consciousness and the power to alter their state. If something had the potential for being, yet that potential chose to reject its actualization by forsaking the necessary factors of transformation, what does this translate to? Potential is not actual. A woman's egg or man's sperm is not life. It's just an ingredient of the potential for life. A being which does not choose to exercise the mechanism which transforms it from potential to actual remains only in a state of potential or unmanifested potential. One who chooses to behave as a servant is rejecting the process of transforming from potential to actual. The only way one can build themselves into a being with character that's conscious and alive is by making their own choices. For a being to be a being, it needs to do what is required to be a being. Just the same for a human life to be born. The sperm needs to make contact with an egg and then go through a growth process to create life. That life has the potential to become a conscious, self-developed character. That life does not take the necessary steps in becoming a being, which it must by exercising free will in a manner which is sovereign, then the life which is mimicking being is not a being, just a simulacrum, an ersatz copy, just the same as a mutated egg or a lame sperm, an error, a mistake, a failure. The NPC mimics being, but it's not true being. The life form which does not choose sovereignty has chosen to behave in a manner which has been predetermined and programmed by another who wishes to enslave, control, and dominate it. Because the life, for whatever reason, has not activated its consciousness properly and become self-respecting and sovereign, it's incapable of making beneficial choices and can only follow a program and set of parameters which has been created for it. Both good and evil individuals can be sovereign, as morality does not determine sovereignty. An evil serial killer, for example, may recognize himself as his own master and choose to exercise his freedom through harmful actions like murdering innocents. While these actions are immoral, they do not change the fact that he has chosen sovereignty, albeit in a negative and destructive way. Sovereignty enables morality, and morality determines and dictates character. Morality requires one to be able to consciously choose good and consciously choose not to be evil. If one is not in control of their choices and is only following programming, they are no different from an animal or a robot. A volitional slave cannot be considered truly good, as goodness presupposes the ability to recognize and choose between good and evil. A volitional slave is inherently bad, on the lower end of the scale of evil, and this stems from their decision to embrace servitude and reject their potential for virtuous action, to be a self-made man. However, because a volitional slave lacks sufficient awareness to fully understand the consequences of their actions, they're not genuinely evil, as true evil requires a high level of consciousness and moral understanding. Therefore, when a volitional slave or servant chooses their condition, they are merely committing an act of ignorant evil rather than engaging in deliberate malice. An android programmed to rescue people may perform good deeds, but it cannot be considered good because it has no choice. For someone to be truly good, they must understand the difference between good and evil, be capable of committing evil acts, yet choose to be good because it aligns with their rational values and self-interest. A sovereign being who chooses to be good recognizes the option to act otherwise in any given situation. When they choose goodness, they can rationally justify their actions, as these are guided by a self-chosen set of values and principles. While a self-chosen code can be seen as programming, the key difference is that a sovereign being's programming is self-made and can be modified at will. In contrast, an android or volitional slave operates under programming that is not self-chosen and which cannot be changed freely. A sovereign individual is self-determined, fully aware of their decisions and the reasons behind them. They consciously choose every aspect of their life, taking responsibility for their own path. Those who don't choose sovereignty exist in a zombie-like trance, living subconsciously. They trade conscious self-determination for an oblivious hypnotic existence where their actions follow programmed routines set by others. They become passive observers, living out a series of societal expectations, obeying teachers, finishing school, getting a job, following a religion, voting, and adhering to countless other prescribed roles without questioning or thinking for themselves for a moment. When someone believes their choices are their own but follows another's design, they deceive themselves into thinking they are sovereign. True sovereignty requires an accurate understanding of existence, as without it one cannot distinguish between their own choices and those shaped by external influence, creating an illusion of freedom. When one elevates their consciousness and chooses sovereignty, they learn to self-govern by understanding objective morality, principles, virtues, and values. They judge their own behavior, strive to live by objective standards, and correct their mistakes. One who is sovereign compares their action and behavior to the reality of morality, not invented legality. A sovereign and the sovereign, historically, often refer to a ruler who governs over land and people, typically with a large domain and a force of slaves or subjects. Some argue that sovereignty is only valid if one has control over a vast amount of land, an army, and a prestigious title. However, this notion of sovereignty is flawed. A king or ruler may be considered sovereign in their domain, but they can be overthrown or defeated by a more powerful ruler whose larger army and greater resources would strip them of their title. Sovereignty isn't omnipotence or invulnerability. Yet, true sovereignty cannot be taken by force. It's an internal state of being. While physical freedom can be stolen, your sovereignty remains intact unless you choose to relinquish it. We all have the power to choose sovereignty based on the nature of our identity as individual, self-conscious, reasoning beings capable of shaping our existence through purposeful action and the pursuit of objective values.